Julian Thorne's fingers drummed against the leather armrest of his Bentley as he scrolled through his calendar. The morning sun glinted off skyscrapers bearing his name, but none of that mattered today. In exactly 48 hours, he would be accepting the Global Innovation Award, and the custom Tom Ford suit he'd ordered months ago had been ruined by his assistant's coffee mishap. Now, with no time for his usual international tailors, Julian was being driven to the one place in New York he'd never set foot in, a small, supposedly elite tailoring shop tucked away in the West Village. "Sir, we've arrived," his driver announced, pulling up to a modest storefront with a simple gold-lettered sign, "Oleander Bespoke." Julian adjusted his Patek Philippe watch and stepped out of the car. "Wait here," he instructed his driver. "This shouldn't take long." The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered the shop. Unlike the glossy, intimidating spaces he was accustomed to, this place felt warm, rich mahogany panels lined the walls, and the scent of cedar and fine wool hung in the air. "I'll be with you in just a moment," called a melodic voice from behind a curtained doorway. Julian wasn't accustomed to waiting for anyone, but before he could respond, a woman emerged from the back room, and his carefully prepared speech about needing urgent service evaporated. She was carrying a bolt of midnight blue fabric, her chestnut hair pinned up in a messy bun with measuring tape draped around her neck. When she looked up, her amber eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Thorne?" she asked, setting down the fabric and extending her hand. "I'm Olivia O'Connor. We spoke on the phone earlier." Julian found himself momentarily speechless as he shook her hand. This was not what he'd expected. In his experience, master tailors were either stern, older Italian men or haughty French artisans, not young women with freckles scattered across their nose and measuring tape tucked behind their ear. "Yes," he finally managed. "I have an emergency situation that requires immediate attention." Olivia's smile remained steady. "So I gathered, a formal suit needed within 48 hours, normally impossible, but you're in luck. I had a cancellation for the Hong Kong diplomatic reception, so I can accommodate you." Julian raised an eyebrow. "You personally?" "I assumed I'd be measured by an assistant and then work with the head tailor." A flash of something annoyance, pride, determination crossed her face before she replied, "Mr. Thorne, I am the head tailor. In fact, I'm the only tailor here. This is my shop." Julian felt a rare flush of embarrassment color his cheeks. "I apologize for the assumption. Your reputation precedes you, though I admit I expected someone older, male," she finished for him, not unkindly. "I get that a lot. Now, shall we proceed?" "Time is rather precious if we're going to get you properly fitted for the Global Innovation Award ceremony." Julian's eyes narrowed. "How did you know what the event was?" Olivia laughed, a genuine sound that somehow made the shop feel even warmer. "Mr. Thorne, your face has been on the business section of every newspaper for weeks. Besides, I make it my business to know who I'm dressing and for what occasion. The context matters as much as the measurements." She gestured toward a raised platform surrounded by mirrors. "If you'll step up here, we can begin." Julian hesitated only a moment before complying. As she picked up her measuring tape, he found himself watching her movements, precise, confident, professional. "Arms out, please," she instructed, and he obeyed without the impatience he usually felt during fittings. "So," Olivia said as she measured his shoulders, "what happened to the Tom Ford? I heard his team had been working on something special for you." Julian stiffened. "How could you possibly know that? The tailoring world is smaller than you might imagine," she replied, jotting down numbers in a small leather-bound notebook. "Especially at this level, and you didn't answer my question." "My assistant spilled coffee on it this morning, completely ruined." Olivia winced in sympathy. "That's unfortunate. Though between us," she lowered her voice conspiratorially, "I can do better than Tom Ford for you." The audacity of her statement startled a laugh out of Julian. "That's quite a claim, Miss O'Connor." "Olivia, please," she corrected, moving to measure his inseam. "And it's not a claim, it's a fact. Turn, please." As Julian turned, he caught her scent something subtle, like fresh linen with a hint of lavender. It was oddly comforting. "What makes you so confident?" He asked, genuinely curious rather than challenging. Olivia looked up at him, her measuring tape stretched between her hands. Because I don't just make suits, Mr. Thorne, I create armor. Every person who walks through that door is preparing for something: a wedding, a funeral, a business negotiation, an award ceremony. My job is to make sure that when they face whatever's coming, they feel invincible. Julian found himself staring at her, struck by the sincerity in her voice. That's not what I expected you to say. What did you expect? Something about Italian silk or hand-stitched buttonholes? She smiled as she wrapped the measuring tape around his waist. Those things matter too, of course, but not as much as how you feel when you put on the suit. Julian watched her work, noting the calluses on her fingers, the absolute precision of her movements. This was clearly someone who had mastered her craft, regardless of her age or gender. What fabric would you recommend? He asked, surprising himself with how much he valued her opinion. Olivia walked to a cabinet and pulled out several swatches. For you, not the standard navy or charcoal everyone expects, given your coloring and the nature of the event. She held up a deep aubergine that in certain lights appeared almost black. It makes a statement without shouting. Julian touched the fabric. It felt substantial yet impossibly smooth. That's not what I would have chosen. That's why you came to me, she replied with a confidence that bordered on teasing. Now, about the cut, your usual is too conservative. You're receiving an innovation award. Your suit should reflect that spirit. For the next hour, Julian found himself engaged in a conversation about fabrics, cuts, and styles that was more stimulating than most of his board meetings. Olivia challenged his preferences, made suggestions that were bold without being outlandish, and somehow knew exactly when to push and when to defer to his taste. That should do it for today, she finally said, closing her notebook. I'll need you back tomorrow afternoon for the first fitting. Julian checked his watch, surprised to find that nearly 2 hours had passed. Tomorrow at 3, perfect, Olivia said, walking him to the door. And Mr. Thorne, leave the tie selection to me. I promise you won't be disappointed. As Julian stepped back into his waiting car, he realized he was looking forward to tomorrow's fitting, a first in his extensive experience with custom clothing. The next day, Julian arrived at Oleander Bespoke precisely at 3, having rearranged a meeting with Japanese investors to make the appointment. His driver appeared surprised when Julian instructed him to return in 2 hours rather than wait. Inside the shop, classical music played softly. Olivia emerged from the back room, this time with her hair down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. Right on time, she said with a smile that Julian found himself returning without thinking. I've been working since dawn. The jacket is ready for a first fitting. She led him to a changing room where a partially constructed jacket hung. The fabric she'd selected was even more striking in larger form, rich, deep, with a subtle sheen that caught the light. This is just the shell, she explained. No lining or finishing yet, but it will give us an idea of the fit and silhouette. Julian removed his business jacket and slipped on the partially completed garment. Even in this rough state, he could feel the difference in how it sat on his shoulders, lighter somehow, yet more substantial. Olivia circled him slowly, making small adjustments, occasionally marking points with a piece of chalk. How does it feel? Different, Julian admitted, but good different. Different is exactly what we're aiming for, she said, adjusting the shoulder seam slightly. You've worn the same style of suit for what, 15 years now? Julian looked at her sharply. How would you know that? I did my research last night, she admitted without a hint of apology. Found photos of you going back to your early days at Thorne Industries. You've barely changed your style since you took over as CEO. Consistency is valuable in business, he replied, slightly defensive. Olivia stood in front of him, boldly adjusting his lapel. Consistency can also become a rut. The world sees you as an innovator, Julian. Your clothing should reflect that. It was the first time she'd used his first name, and something about hearing it in her voice made his pulse quicken slightly. Is that why you became a tailor, to help men like me out of their ruts? He asked, watching her work. Olivia laughed. No, I became a tailor because my grandfather was one. He raised me after my parents died, and I spent my childhood in his shop in Dublin, learning to sew before I could properly write. She marked another adjustment on the sleeve. He always said clothes tell stories. I believed him. Julian found himself wanting to know more about her, a rare feeling for someone who typically viewed personal details as irrelevant in business relationships. "What brought you from Dublin to New York?" he asked. "Fashion school at first. Then apprenticeships with master tailors from 3 different countries. When my grandfather passed away 5 years ago, he left me enough to open this place." She stepped back to examine her work. "What about you? The business journals tell your professional story, but why the innovation focus? You could have kept Thorne Industries as the shipping company it was when your father ran it." Julian was surprised by the question. Most people didn't ask him why he'd transformed his father's traditional shipping business into a global logistics technology company. "The world was changing," he said simply. "I either had to change with it or become obsolete." "That's the practical answer," Olivia said, kneeling to check the drape of the jacket, "but not the real one. Nobody works as hard as you do just to avoid becoming obsolete." Julian watched her working, her fingers deft and sure. "My father believed in maintaining tradition at all costs. We argued about it constantly. When he died and I took over, I suppose I had something to prove." Olivia looked up at him, her amber eyes serious. "And have you proven it?" The question caught him off guard. "The company is worth 10 times what it was when he ran it." "That's not what I asked," she said, rising to her feet. For a long moment, they stood facing each other, and Julian had the unsettling feeling that this woman he'd known for barely a day could somehow see past the carefully constructed exterior he presented to the world. "I should continue working on this," she said finally, helping him remove the jacket. "The trousers should be ready for fitting by tomorrow morning. Can you come in at 10? Julian nodded, already rearranging his mental schedule. 10 works. As he left the shop, Julian realized he hadn't checked a single email or made one call during the entire fitting, another first. That evening, sitting in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Julian found himself thinking about Olivia, her confident hands, the intelligence in her eyes, the way she'd questioned him not as Julian Thorne, billionaire CEO, but simply as a man. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had done that. The next morning, Julian arrived at Oleander Bespoke to find Olivia looking slightly disheveled, a smudge of chalk on her cheek and her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked, noticing the empty coffee cup and rumpled blanket on the small sofa in the corner of the shop. "A few hours," she admitted. "Custom suits don't normally happen in 2 days, but I think you'll be pleased with the progress." The fitting went quickly, with Olivia making final adjustments to both the jacket and trousers. As she worked, Julian noticed photographs on the wall he hadn't paid attention to before. Olivia with an older man who must have been her grandfather, Olivia receiving some kind of award, Olivia standing proudly outside her shop on what appeared to be opening day. "What time is the ceremony tomorrow?" she asked, breaking into his thoughts. 7 in the evening, Julian replied, "though I'll need the suit by 5 at the latest." Olivia nodded. "I'll have it ready by 4. You can do your final fitting here and then it's yours to take. You're certain you can finish in time?" She looked up at him, a challenge in her eyes. "I've never missed a deadline, Julian. I don't intend to start with you." The way she said his name sent an unexpected warmth through him. "I didn't mean to question your abilities," her expression softened. "I know. But you wouldn't be the successful man you are if you didn't verify everything personally." She made one final mark on the fabric. "That's all I need for now. Tomorrow at 4, Julian nodded, reluctant to leave but having no reason to stay. Tomorrow at 4. He spent the rest of the day distracted, thinking about the suit, about the ceremony, and if he was honest with himself, about Olivia. There was something about her that had gotten under his skin, her confidence, perhaps, her talent, the way she treated him like a person rather than a portfolio. The next day, Julian arrived at Oleander Bespoke at precisely 4 o'clock. The shop was quiet, with no sign of Olivia. He checked his watch, wondering if he'd misunderstood the time. "Olivia," he called out. "Just a moment." Her voice came from the back room. I'm just finishing the last details." A minute later, she emerged carrying a garment bag. Her eyes were bright with excitement, though dark circles beneath them betrayed her lack of sleep. "It's ready," she said, unzipping the bag to reveal the suit. Julian had seen countless bespoke suits in his life, had worn garments made by the finest tailors in London, Milan, and Paris. But even at first glance, he could tell this was different. The rich aubergine fabric seemed to come alive in the light, and every detail from the placement of the buttons to the cut of the lapels was executed with perfect precision. "Try it on," Olivia urged, handing him the garment bag. "The shirt and tie are inside as well." Julian took the bag and went to the changing room. The moment he slipped on the trousers, he knew this was exceptional work. The shirt fit perfectly, with enough room for movement but not a fraction of excess fabric. The tie was a subtly patterned silk in a shade that complemented the suit perfectly. But it was when he put on the jacket that Julian truly understood what Olivia had meant about creating armor. The garment settled onto his shoulders like it had been waiting for him his entire life. It wasn't just that it fit perfectly, it seemed to enhance everything about him, from his posture to his presence. He stepped out of the changing room to find Olivia waiting anxiously. When she saw him, her face transformed with genuine delight. "I knew it," she said softly. "Turn around, please." Julian complied, catching sight of himself in the mirror. The man who looked back at him was familiar, yet somehow enhanced, more commanding, more present, more himself. "What do you think?" Olivia asked, making a small adjustment to his collar. "It's—" Julian searched for the right words. "I've never worn anything like it." "That's the idea," she said, circling him with a critical eye. "It's still you, just the most authentic version, the version that's going to accept that award tonight knowing he's earned it on his own terms, not his father's." Julian looked at her in surprise. "How did you—" "I told you, clothes tell stories," she said with a small smile. "And I'm very good at reading them." Standing there in the suit she'd created for him, Julian felt an overwhelming urge to know more about this woman who had somehow seen through him so easily. "Have dinner with me," he said abruptly. "After the ceremony tonight," Olivia's eyes widened in surprise. "That's not necessary. You've already paid for the suit quite generously, I might add. This isn't about payment," Julian said, struggling to articulate what he was feeling. "This is about— I'd like to get to know you better, outside of this professional context." A blush colored Olivia's cheeks. "I'm not sure that's a good idea. You're my client." "After tonight, the transaction is complete," Julian pointed out. "Then I'm just a man asking a woman to dinner." Olivia looked at him for a long moment, and Julian felt oddly vulnerable under her gaze despite the perfect suit. "All right," she said finally. "Dinner, but not tonight. You'll have post-ceremony obligations tomorrow evening." Julian smiled, feeling an unfamiliar flutter of anticipation. "Tomorrow evening it is. I'll pick you up here at 7. Olivia nodded. 7 works, and Julian— She adjusted his tie one last time. "Congratulations on your award. Your father would be proud." The simple statement, delivered without flattery or agenda, touched something in Julian that he'd kept carefully guarded for years. On impulse, he caught her hand as she withdrew it from his tie. "Thank you, Olivia, not just for the suit, but for seeing more." Their eyes held for a moment that stretched between them, filled with unspoken potential. Then Julian reluctantly checked his watch. "I should go. My driver is waiting." Olivia stepped back, professional once more. "Of course. Good luck tonight, though I doubt you'll need it." As Julian left the shop, he felt different, and not just because of the extraordinary suit. Something had shifted in the last 3 days, a change as subtle but significant as the alterations Olivia had made to the fabric that now clothed him. That night, as he accepted the Global Innovation Award, Julian was aware of presenting a different version of himself to the world, one that felt more authentic than the carefully constructed image he'd maintained for years. His acceptance speech, which he'd planned to keep strictly business-focused, veered into unexpected territory as he spoke about transformation and authenticity. "True innovation," he found himself saying to the crowd of industry elites, "isn't just about technology or profit margins. It's about having the courage to become the most authentic version of yourself, even when that means challenging traditions or expectations." The words earned him a standing ovation, but as Julian looked out at the sea of applause, he found himself wishing for one particular face in the crowd. The next evening, Julian arrived at Oleander Bespoke at 7 o'clock sharp. Through the shop window, he could see Olivia waiting inside, no longer in her work clothes but wearing a simple emerald green dress that highlighted the amber of her eyes. When she saw his car, she locked up the shop and stepped outside to meet him. Julian got out to open the car door for her. "You look beautiful," he said, meaning it more than any similar compliment he'd ever paid. Olivia smiled. "And you're not wearing the suit I made you." Julian glanced down at the charcoal gray suit he'd chosen for tonight. "I thought it might be in poor taste to wear another tailor's work on our first date." "First date?" Olivia raised an eyebrow. "That's rather presumptuous, Mr. Thorne. This could be our only date." "It won't be," Julian said with a certainty that surprised even himself. He held the car door open for her. "Shall we?" Instead of taking her to one of the exclusive restaurants where he usually dined, Julian directed his driver to a small Italian place in the West Village. It was elegant but unpretentious, with soft lighting and tables spaced far enough apart to allow for private conversation. Over plates of homemade pasta and glasses of Barolo, Julian found himself telling Olivia things he rarely shared about the complicated relationship with his father, the pressure he'd put on himself to prove his worth, the loneliness that sometimes came with his position. In turn, Olivia told him about growing up in her grandfather's shop in Dublin, about losing her parents young, about coming to New York with nothing but talent and determination. She spoke about the challenges of being a young woman in a male-dominated field and about her dreams for her small business. "I don't want to become a brand or a chain," she explained. "I love the one-on-one work, getting to know each client, creating something unique for them. That's where the magic happens." "But you could expand, reach more people," Julian suggested, thinking like the businessman he was. Olivia shook her head. "Not everything needs to scale, Julian. Sometimes something is perfect precisely because it's small and personal." Her words made him pause, challenging his automatic thinking in a way he found both unsettling and refreshing. As the evening progressed, Julian found himself increasingly drawn to this woman who approached life so differently than he did. Her passion for her craft, her integrity, her ability to see beyond surfaces, all of it fascinated him. When dinner ended, they decided to walk for a while, strolling through the village streets as the early summer night enveloped them. Without thinking, Julian reached for her hand, and Olivia's fingers intertwined with his as if they belonged there. "I watched your acceptance speech online," she admitted as they walked. "It was different than what I expected." "It was different than what I expected too," Julian replied with a small laugh. "I think you influenced me more than I realized." "Me?" Olivia looked surprised. "You have a way of seeing past the surface to what matters," Julian explained. "It's what makes you exceptional at your work, and it's what made me." He paused, searching for the right words. "It made me want to be more authentic too." They stopped walking, facing each other in the pool of light from a street lamp. Julian looked at Olivia's upturned face, at the intelligence and warmth in her eyes, and knew with sudden clarity that he wanted more evenings like this, more conversations that challenged and enlightened him, more moments of genuine connection. "I'd like to see you again, Olivia," he said softly. "Not as a client, not for one dinner. I'd like to explore whatever this is between us." Olivia's expression was thoughtful. "You know my business is my priority. I won't give that up or change it, even for a billionaire with persuasive arguments about scaling and expansion." Julian smiled. "I wouldn't ask you to. What you've built is remarkable precisely because it's yours on your terms. And you're used to moving quickly in business and, I suspect, in relationships," she continued. "I'm not interested in being someone's whirlwind romance before they move on to the next exciting prospect." "Fair enough," Julian acknowledged. "So we take it slowly, get to know each other properly." Olivia studied his face as if measuring him in a different way than she had in her shop. "Why me, Julian? You could have anyone." The question was direct, without coyness or false modesty, and Julian appreciated that. Because you saw me, he said simply. Not my net worth or my company or my reputation. You looked at me and saw things even I had forgotten were there. And because when I'm with you, I feel like the person I always wanted to become. Olivia's expression softened and she reached up to touch his face gently. That's a better answer than I expected. Does that mean yes? Instead of answering with words, Olivia rose on her tiptoes and kissed him a gentle, questioning kiss that Julian returned with equal care. As if they were both handling something precious and new when they separated, Olivia's smile held both warmth and challenge. Yes, but on one condition. Name it, Julian said, still holding her close. Next time you need a suit, don't wait for a coffee disaster, just call me first, Julian laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. Deal. 6 months later, Julian stood in Olivia's shop after hours, watching as she made final adjustments to a suit he would wear to the opening of a youth technology center his foundation had funded in her grandfather's neighborhood in Dublin. Their relationship had deepened gradually, with Julian learning the value of patience and presence, and Olivia learning to trust that his interest in her was genuine and enduring. They traveled together to Ireland to visit her grandfather's grave and to Julian's childhood home in Boston, sharing the places that had shaped them. Almost finished, Olivia murmured, her skilled hands making an invisible adjustment to his collar. Julian watched her work, still amazed at how someone could transform a piece of fabric into something that felt like an extension of himself. But then, Olivia had a gift for seeing the potential in things and in people. I have something to ask you, he said, as she stepped back to examine her work. If it's about expanding the business again, the answer is still no, she replied with a teasing smile. They'd had this conversation several times, always ending with Julian respecting her vision for her craft. It's not about the business, Julian said, taking her hands in his. It's about us. Olivia's expression turned serious as she met his gaze. What about us? These past 6 months have shown me what matters, Julian said, his voice steady despite the rapid beating of his heart. Not acquisitions or expansions or profit margins, connection, authenticity, love. He squeezed her hands gently. I love you, Olivia. I love your passion and your integrity and the way you see the world. I love who I am when I'm with you. Olivia's eyes widened as Julian reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. Inside was not the massive diamond his wealth could easily afford, but a vintage emerald ring he'd found in Dublin, reminiscent of her grandfather's heritage and the green dress she'd worn on their first date. I'm not asking for an immediate answer, Julian said as Olivia stared at the ring. I know you like to measure twice before making a commitment, but I wanted you to know that whenever you're ready, I'm hoping you'll marry me. For a moment, Olivia was silent, her eyes moving from the ring to Julian's face. Then a slow smile spread across her features, lighting her from within. You know, she said softly, sometimes you don't need to measure twice, sometimes you just know when something fits perfectly. She held out her left hand and Julian slipped the ring onto her finger, his heart full to bursting as she whispered, yes. As he gathered her in his arms, Julian reflected that when he'd walked into Oleander Bespoke 3 days before the most important ceremony of his career, he'd been seeking a suit that would impress the world. Instead, he'd found a woman who had helped him rediscover himself, and in doing so, had given him a future brighter than any award or business success could offer. The custom suit had indeed been exceptional. But it was the tailor who had truly measured up to his dreams he hadn't even known he had, until Olivia O'Connor had taken his measure and found him worthy of